Hi, this is Dave T1963. It's been a long time since I've made a video. As some of you might be aware, I had some health issues. A couple viruses I picked up and stuff, but I'm kind of getting past that and ready to get out there scouting again. But while I've been quarantined at home and stuff, I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos. And I want to talk a little bit about accessing your hunting spots because, like I've said over and over again, I think probably more big buck lives are saved on how we approach our stands than any other factor, including the wind. I just don't think people spend enough time thinking through access, and your hunt can be over before it started. But having said that, I want to address something that I'm seeing out there. There's a lot of people that are well known that hunt private farms and can manipulate the land and put in crops and in tall grasses and stuff like that to really work their access and stuff, which just isn't realistic on public land. And they're making it way too complicated. They're making it sound like, my gosh, you know, that a deer can smell ground scent for 2 weeks, and that if your access isn't 100% perfect, you're going to blow that spot for 2 weeks. And I'm here to tell you that that's just not true. Deer encounter predators on public land all the time, including people. Not just hunters. There's fishermen. There's people out there that are just nature photographers, hikers, horseback riders. They're constantly encountering human beings. So take all that with a grain of salt. You can't listen to these YouTube experts hunting in Iowa, Illinois, or whatever on private property where they have exclusive rights and they can manage and control access, okay? Now, what I want to say is, yes, use every advantage you can, but there's no way, especially in farmland type habitat, where deer will, yes, they all travel in certain ways, edges, ravines, benches, things like that, saddles. So you have to think about all that. But deer kind of also, in a lot of habitat, wander. They don't walk the same trail day after day after day. And there's no way you're going to be able to access some of these spots without leaving ground scent, period. Okay? So what I do is when I set a stand up, I don't focus on 360 degrees around me where any deer might travel. You're going to drive yourself crazy trying to do that. You have to pick a specific trail or destination spot that you are hunting that tree for. Okay? And then using the wind and any terrain features, you approach that to where you don't walk across that specific item you're hunting for that day. All right? For instance, if let's say you're hunting a primary scrape, you have to start thinking like a mature buck and ask yourself, if I was a mature buck not wanting to get shot, how would I approach this scrape to accomplish two goals? The first goal is to be able to tell if a hot doe has visited the scrape. The other one is to do it in a way where you can scent check it or visually check it to ensure there's no predators close by. Okay? So thinking with those two things, you then have to determine, this is how I believe this buck would approach this scrape. You're not going to be perfect, 100% accurate on this. But you have the longer you do this, you kind of get those tendencies, and you start to look at terrain features and say, okay, this is how I think this buck is going to approach this stand. And then you give them the wind advantage to do that. Having done that, you can then determine how you're going to approach that specific spot. And sometimes there are cases, because of the way public land boundaries are and terrain features, that you do have to walk across the trail to get into the perfect tree for that wind condition in that destination spot. What I always do in those cases is I walk right where I want to shoot. That's where I'm going to cross that trail, because when that buck walks up and hits that scent trail, if he's going to alert to it, he's going to do it right where I want to shoot anyway. But, you know, the primary reason why I wanted to make this video is, you know, if you have private farm country and you can build mock scrapes and you can put this tall switchgrass and all this stuff and set it up for the perfect ideal entry and exit, of course you're going to do that. Public land, you don't always have that option. You got to hunt where the deer are traveling. You can only manipulate the topography and stuff to a certain degree. Really, you can't on most of the public land I hunt. So you have to hunt for what you have. Pick out your destination spot. I don't care if it's white oaks. I don't care if it's a creek crossing. I don't care if it's a scrape. I don't care if it's a J-hook into bedding. Any one of these destination spots or spots you're hunting, you have to think ahead and say, where do I anticipate that buck to travel through? How's he going to approach this area? What kind of wind would he do it on? Because you can't set up for an ideal wind for you and expect the buck to do something that's totally unnatural. You have to go from the buck's perspective. If I'm a buck and I'm gonna check these white oaks, I'm gonna come in this trail with this wind to give me all the advantage. Once you identify that, now you as a hunter can now set up just off wind. Okay, then once you figure out the tree you want to be in, now you can start thinking through, okay, how can I get in here without being detected? And like I said, use topography. If there's a ditch that you can go into, get in that. If there's a waterway or a creek or something, you can do that. Sometimes it's walking on the opposite side of a ridge. Knowing the bucks would be bedded over here and the destination spot's over here, you walk far enough on the downwind side of this ridge to where they're not going to be able to pick up your approach. There's a lot of things you can do to get into a spot, but it takes thinking through these things, okay? And once again, I just want to come back. Pick out your reason for hunting that spot. Don't just set up in a white oak flat that's 100 yards wide and, you know, several hundred yards long and say, I'm going to hunt here on this end because the wind's going to be blowing a certain way and it will blow my scent. That's the wrong way to approach it. You have to approach it like the buck. I'm a buck and I'm going to go feed on these white acorns. How would I approach that to give me the most security and the safety factor from a visual and wind perspective? Once you determine that, now you as the hunter can start thinking, okay, here's 90% of the time a mature buck, this is what they're probably going to do to get here, to get to this spot I want to hunt. And then you can set up accordingly. Okay, and of course during the rut, some of that changes a little bit because now you could typically find bucks chasing does or trailing a doe. And so you would concentrate more on how does would use the topography. To me, does a lot of times will ignore the wind a lot more than bucks will when they're traveling. So think through these things, you know, and get it from the buck's perspective. Play the wind like you were a buck trying to stay alive and you were approaching this creek crossing, this scrape, this oak flat, whatever it is. How would you approach it and under what conditions? And then as a hunter, you can play off of that. Most of the time, the mature bucks, when they're entering to a destination spot, whether it's a food source, a scrape, a doe bedding area, or whatever, they don't just randomly walk through the woods. They know where these destination spots are. And they will use some kind of advantage. And it's not always the wind. A lot of people get screwed up with this. And they'll say, well, I saw a buck walk right into a scrape and he didn't use the wind. Well, maybe he had a visual orientation, or maybe he was bedded close by where he's been watching that scrape most of the day. So there's other factors besides just wind, but 90% of the time they're going to use the wind first and a visual secondary, or they'll use both to their advantage. Okay, so once again, The main reason why I wanted to do this was, especially for some of these young hunters on public land, listening to some of these people giving all this great advice on land that they can manipulate. Don't get all tied up into all that. You're not going to ruin a spot because you can't control and manipulate the perfect entry to where deer never gets your scent. There are some specific stand sites that you can do that, but most of the time you have to pick out, I'm going to hunt this destination spot, this specific apple tree, this oak tree, this creek crossing, this scrape, this doe bedding area, and then think like the buck, how a mature buck would think about entering into that area, and then set up accordingly. Okay? Have any questions? Drop them in the comments below. Dave T1963 out.